sponsored terrorism, and he ordered new sanctions aimed at curbing its ballistic missile ambitions. European Union leaders have arrived for a summit in Brussels, stressing their unity. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, said they were united in support for Spain over the crisis in Catalonia, and the EU's negotiator, Michel Barnier, in the Brexit talks. Germany's Chancellor, Angela Merkel, said she would press for a renewal of the $3.5 billion annual payment to Turkey to help control the flow of migrants into Europe. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Her partner said she'd recently suffered a fall. From Paris, here's our correspondent, Hugh Schofield.
Long before Brigitte Bardot earned herself the nickname BB, there was DD, Danielle Darrieux. It was way back in 1931, in the early years of sound films, that the French were first charmed by her performance as the teenage daughter of arriviste parents in the comedy Le Bal. Though she was lured briefly to Hollywood, the vast majority of Danielle Darrieux's more than 100 films were French. Most famously, perhaps, she starred in 1952 as the beautiful aristocrat whose diamond earrings are the centre of the plot in Madame II of Max Ophuls. The French adored her natural joie de vivre and her beauty.
BBC News.
Hello, welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. It comes to you live from London. I'm Razia Iqbal. We'll be heading to Barcelona shortly. The Spanish government is to begin the process of imposing direct rule on Catalonia after the regional government ignored a deadline to halt its bid for independence. That is our top story today. Also coming up in the programme, scientists have long suspected that insects are in dramatic decline, but new evidence now confirms this. A leading conservation researcher says this could have wide-reaching consequences.
We look out into the countryside now, we see lots of wildlife, so we think it's fine, but what we don't realise is that 100 years ago there was a lot more. You can't carry on decreasing the biomass of insects by 6% a year without, at some point, the whole system really starting to collapse.
Stay with us for that. And as the British Prime Minister Theresa May sends a letter to reassure EU citizens in the UK that their future is safe, we'll be speaking to one of the letter's recipients. We begin with the continuing political crisis in Spain. We appear to be entering uncharted waters. The head of the regional government, Carles Puigdemont, ignored Madrid's ultimatum to rescind the region's bid for independence, and Madrid has responded thus. On Saturday, the government will hold a special cabinet session when it will trigger the process to activate Article 155 of Spain's 1978 constitution. The Spanish government spokesman, Íñigo Méndez de Vigo, said the Catalan government had failed to meet a deadline to clarify whether it had declared independence.
Due to
the lack of a clear and precise response, the Spanish government understands there has not been a reply to its requirements. As a result, the government will continue with procedures outlined in Article 155 of the Constitution with the objective of restoring legality in Catalonia.
He said the government would do what was required to enforce Spanish law.
No one should doubt that the government will use all means available to it to restore legality and constitutional order as soon as possible, to regain peaceful coexistence for citizens and to stop the political and judicial insecurity, for which the only ones responsible are the leaders of the Catalan government. They are causing economic and social harm to all their citizens.
Well, Article 155 will allow the central authorities to take over the semi-autonomous powers of any of the country's 17 regions, including Catalonia, and it has never been used before. The move came after the Catalan leader threatened to have the regional parliament ratify independence if Madrid refused to engage in dialogue. Let's begin by going straight to Barcelona and joining the BBC's Paul Moss, who is there for us. Paul.
Yeah, hi, welcome to Barcelona on what is a ghastly day of weather. And I mention that because, you know, whether you're superstitious or not, it's hard to avoid the symbolism. As that deadline passed to rescind the Independence Declaration, we had torrential rain, we had lightning. It really did seem to everyone that we are truly entering stormy times. You've got to remember that the division here is not just between Catalonia and the government in Madrid, it's a division within Catalonia. When there were proper scientifically done surveys, not the referendum, but polls done, it showed that Catalonia was divided down the middle over whether it wanted to go alone and be an independent country. I brought two people together this lunchtime to discuss it. Francesc Bonet, who's very much in favour of independence, and Sergio Correa, who's against independence for Catalonia and is also very critical of the behaviour of the Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont.
I think what Mr. Puigdemont is doing is causing tremendous turmoil, very bad for business, very bad for people in general, because I think it's dividing tremendously the population of Catalonia. I think there should be some dialogue without preconditions on both sides.
Francesc, there has been a lot of criticism of President Puigdemont just for going so fast, holding a referendum which the authorities don't recognise, and then saying, right, we're going full scale ahead with the declaration of independence very soon. Couldn't he have at least taken some more time?
Well, I would disagree on this opinion that Mr. Puigdemont might be rushing it too hard. There's been since you can say 2010 that there's been a major independentist rallies. We have done a lot of offers, and in fact, last week he did an offer which is exactly what Mr. Sergio here has said, is a dialogue without preconditions. If the other part doesn't want to dialogue, so what are we expecting exactly?
It's true, isn't it, Sergio, that the Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy has said he doesn't want to talk while this declaration of independence is hanging over him. It's not exactly encouraging an amicable solution, is it?
No, I don't think it is an amicable solution. I think he's following the Constitution in a very literal way, but at the end of the day, you have to follow something which is written and agreed upon.
Is that the problem, the Constitution? Because it was ruled again this week that the Constitution gives no right to self-determination to the peoples of Spain. Other countries, my own Britain, allowed Scotland to have a referendum on independence. Canada allowed Quebec to have one. If Spain remains this rigid, is that not a recipe for the kind of conflict we see now?
I believe it is a moment for considering a full constitutional revision.
Well, there you are, Francesc. There's a suggestion. Catalonia could not declare independence but work towards changing the constitution of Spain.
Not at all. I think that Catalonia must declare its independence. We did ask for a better relationship with Spain. That the logic of nowadays Spain is to cut autonomy, to suppress autonomy for Catalonia. So the reaction has been, okay, most of us, or a lot of us, wish our independence because it's our nation, as every country's right.
One offer that's now emerged, the government in Madrid has said that if Catalonia holds regional elections, they will then hold off imposing this Article 155. Why not do that? Why not have regional elections? And then you can see if the population really are behind the nationalist parties. At the moment, the regional government here is saying no to these elections.
But, Paul, we did a referendum of independence, and more than 2 million people voted for yes.
Sergio.
It's hard to say what the central government is going to do, Mr. Rajoy. I hope that if he's already declared that he's going to impose Article 155, if that's the case, that should be done in a very surgical way, minimal way. Otherwise, I think we're going to create conflict of a big dimension and probably even civil unrest.
The words of Sergio Correa and Francesc Bonet. Well, a civilised conversation there, but there's no way around it. Everyone I've spoken to on the pro-independence side has said that if Article 155 is imposed, it will be greeted with protests, with demonstrations of the kind we've seen over the last couple of weeks. I should say that all the people I speak to insist that these protests will be peaceful. One man I was speaking to this morning said they're using Mahatma Gandhi as an inspiration. I think after the violence that we saw on the referendum day itself, when there were allegations of police brutality, everyone is hoping that things will, for now, remain peaceful. Razia.
Paul Moss, thank you very much, joining us live there from Barcelona. Let's speak now to Carlos Flores, who is a professor of constitutional law at the University of Valencia. Welcome to NewsHour. Let's start by just looking at the fact that this is all unprecedented, and we are really unclear about what Article 155 and how it will manifest itself. What's your understanding of what it will allow the government in Madrid to do?
Well, basically, Article 155 of the Constitution provides a blank space for the performance of the central government. The fact that this article is rather short, the fact that it has never been implemented before, not even in Germany. We took it from the German basic law, but it has never been used in Germany. And the fact that there is not an act of parliament that develops the contents of this article, at this point provides the government with quite a big leeway, a big range of possibilities to act. As some of your colleagues have already said, we could face a surgical application of 155 in which only a limited amount of competences or elected officials would be substituted, or a wider intervention of the Catalan autonomy.
Beyond, outside of Catalonia, there are probably people inside Catalonia who didn't vote for independence, but outside of Catalonia, is it your understanding that the invoking of this article has broad support, and the Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, is actually doing this with the confidence that people will be supporting it?
Well, let me please correct you. I mean, there were not people in Catalonia voting against independence because people who wanted to remain in Spain simply chose not to participate in a consultation that was not illegal and provided no guarantee whatsoever of a fair result. The fact that the Catalan government has declared that 90% of the votes cast were in favor of independence speaks in a loud voice about the credibility of this poll, of this voting. Regarding the rest of the country, well, not long ago, talking about the application of 155 was almost a political taboo. I mean, no politician wanted even to mention that, even to put a date on the application of this section of the Constitution, even though it's perfectly constitutional, perfectly legal, and perfectly democratic. But we are beyond this point, and I think that there is already quite a good deal of agreement, of consensus among the public opinion, among the political actors, and even among the academic community. I mean, I have many colleagues, constitutional law professors, who are trying to explain how this should happen, but certainly they are not against this from happening. So certainly the Spanish government will face unrest and opposition on the side of the Catalan government and people, but they will have a fair deal of consensus behind them if they choose to do it.
And to what extent are people discussing the potential immediate fallout from invoking this article, that people will be demonstrating, hopefully peacefully, but that will pose a real problem to the government in Madrid?
Well, this is already happening. I mean, Catalan nationalist parties have already been mobilizing people. They have been doing it for years, if not for decades. I mean, you cannot assume that the violation of the law can be justified by public mobilization. I mean, what if I propose to introduce death penalty, or what if I propose to introduce racism and I had a bunch of people supporting it in the streets? It would be still against the law, against the Constitution. So, I mean, there are limits to what people may vote, and there are limits to what people in the streets may stand for, regardless of whether these demonstrations are numerous or not. And let me add, those who are in favor of Catalonia remaining within the Spanish state are also taking the streets. There was a huge demonstration, the first in a long time in Barcelona on October the 8th. I will not get into this usual discussion about the figures, but it was a huge demonstration.
Yeah, it was huge. Just very briefly before we finish. Underpinning all of this is Europe. The EU leaders are meeting in Brussels. Mariano Rajoy is there. There has been a huge amount of support coming from Brussels for the government in Madrid.
That is our perception. Most, if not every European Union country is standing for Spain. First, because Spain is a reliable partner in the European Union and a democratic country. Second, because obviously no one wants this to happen today in Spain and maybe tomorrow in their own countries. Quite on the contrary, the Catalan government is saying or trying to convince the citizens that their independence will be supported by the international community, which is certainly not true.
We will leave it there. Carlos Flores, Professor of Constitutional Law at the University of Valencia. Thank you. Coming up later in today's programme, a rare report from the top of a volcano in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
I've been to a couple of volcanoes before that haven't been active. I expected an active one to have a little bit of off-gas or something, but this is just, it's like a soup just kind of brewing and stewing, and it's just, you could spend all night out here if it wasn't so cold.
Stay with us for that report. Our headlines this hour. The Spanish government is to begin the process of imposing direct rule on Catalonia after the regional government ignored a deadline to halt its bid for independence. That is, of course, our top story this hour. Also, Chinese state media say the political thought of President Xi Jinping is to be enshrined in the official ideology of the ruling Communist Party. We're going to be talking about that very soon. And scientists have warned of the growing threats to the world's largest freshwater lake, Lake Baikal in Russia. This is Razia Iqbal with NewsHour, coming to you live from the BBC in London. The latest news from China's 5-yearly Communist Party Congress seems to indicate that the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, is strengthening his position at the helm. Chinese-run state media has been reporting that he's to be given his own political theory, Xi Jinping thought, a distinction that hasn't been awarded to any leader since Deng Xiaoping, who left office nearly 3 decades ago. But crucially, this is not being reported in the Chinese language media at this point, only in the state-run Xinhua's English language service. So what does this mean? Richard McGregor, author of a book on China's Communist Party, joins me now in the NewsHour studio. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
First of all, how significant, how important is it, the naming of a political theory after a leader?
Well, it's very important. As you said, the last time it happened was with Deng Xiaoping 3 decades ago. That was Deng Xiaoping thought. Before that is Mao Zedong theory. Sorry, what am I saying? It's Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory. So it basically places you in the pantheon of great and powerful leaders. And I think that's the main message, if it in fact does happen.
OK, well, we'll talk about the if it does in fact happen in a moment. Tell us what we know about what Xi Jinping thought is.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, it doesn't tell you necessarily in any detail. It's like a mark of political power. It doesn't tell you what's going to happen with interest rates, with export policy, with state-owned reform and the like. What it does tell you about is his grip on the Communist Party, his grip on the ability to hire and fire people, his ability to force policy in the direction that he wants it to go, and he's already made that very clear. It's the sort of unique Chinese hybrid system. It doesn't give you any guidance on a day-to-day basis about what's going to happen.
So what you're suggesting is much more to do with the cult of a personality.
It is the cult of personality in a sense. I resist that term a little bit because that sounds like Chairman Mao, and I think it's quite different from Chairman Mao, and China is very different from Chairman Mao. I think it's a signal of his ascendancy, and it's a signal to anybody who should dare challenge him that they'd better watch out, that he's in charge and has control on all levers of power in China, which in fact, as of the moment, he does.
Let's talk about the distinction I made in the introduction to this story, that it was being reported in the Chinese language, English language service, but not in the Chinese language media at the moment. What's the significance and importance of that?
Well, I think the first thing we should note is don't get too far out ahead of the official press in China on any and all developments in politics, because it remains a deeply opaque system and you predict things with confidence at your peril. I think I don't know what's happened here, and we may be reading into it too much, that it's appeared in English and not in Chinese. I personally would be very surprised if this did not happen, because we've had a drum roll now for nearly a month that the constitution, the party constitution, would be amended to include this. And if it slipped out on Xinhua English and doesn't appear later officially in Chinese, that might tell us something, without stretching it too much, about a debate, internal debate about whether it in fact should happen.
And given the position at the helm that he now holds, what does it tell us about those leaders who are much lower down the pecking order in terms of their political ambitions?
Well, I think the first thing to know is that in a year like this year, it's a once every 5 years party congress, the job of Xi Jinping, the thing that takes up most of his time, it's like
It's the whole trail is made out of hardened black lava. We've finally made it to the summit of the volcano, and I'm sitting on the edge of a vast crater, and 600 metres below me, right in the middle, is an enormous bubbling lava lake. With me here is Gavin, who is from the UK. and has climbed up with us to come and see this spectacular sight.
I've been to a couple of volcanoes before that haven't been active. I expected an active one to have a little bit of off-gas or something, but this is just, it's like a soup just kind of brewing and stewing, and it's just, you could spend all night out here if it wasn't so cold just checking out the lava flows. It's incredible.
The top of Mount Nyiragongo is 3,470 metres high, so it's really cold up here, but I can feel the warmth of the burning lava lake from the edge of the crater. The tranquility of the Virunga National Park is in stark contrast with the city below. Goma, Eastern DRC's largest city, was part destroyed by the last eruption 15 years ago. 90,000 people lost their homes and dozens of residents died.
We saw the smoke, but we didn't know what an eruption was. Some people even moved closer to see what was happening. That's how so many people died. They were ignorant. We didn't even know that lava burned everything they touched.
But there was a group of Congolese scientists monitoring the volcano at the time. Celestine Mahinda, director of the Goma Volcanologist Observatory, says his warnings went ignored.
Because myself, I was alone as a scientist on the top of Nyiragongo. We have to add more scientists and to learn more.
Today, some parts of the city are built around the solidified lava, and the local population is much more aware of the risks than before. The scientists work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
The volcano is like a sick person, and we have to monitor every time, every second, every 4 minutes. We have seismic data. Every 10 minutes, we have the situation of temperatures.
Volcanologist Mahinda is now a local celebrity. If his family leaves town, residents worry about another eruption. But for now, there are no warning signs and the tourists continue to climb.
That was our reporter Charlotte Atwood reporting for us from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo.
You're with the BBC World Service, where we're exploring the lives, opportunities and daily challenges of women around the globe.
100 Women on the BBC World Service.
This place offers a chance to build a different kind of society from the ground up.
Hopefully one day they will accept the idea that a woman can do something. A woman can be whatever she wants.
The thing is, you can't expect results immediately. You have to take everything one step at a time.
Join us for a season of stories and solutions from 100 of the world's most inspiring women.
One of the most important messages that I can give is to try and strive to be more than you think you can. Because for me, I got to live my dream.
The BBC's 100 Women.
They need to know that these girls are their sisters and these girls need to be respected.
On radio, TV and at bbcworldservice.com/100women.
Coming up here on NewsHour in the next 30 minutes, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, his daughter and his son-in-law are charged in a corruption scandal. Also coming up, the British Prime Minister tells EU citizens she wants them to stay in Britain after Brexit. How reassured are they? And why are insect populations in steep decline? And what can be done to change it? All coming up after a summary of the latest world news.
BBC News with Marian Marshall. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia's autonomous powers on Saturday. The cabinet will draw up measures for formal approval under Article 155 of the Constitution. It's never been invoked before. The move came after the Catalan leader threatened to get the regional parliament to ratify independence if Madrid refused to talk. Chinese state media says the country's leader, Xi Jinping, has been given his own political theory, which would entrench his position at the top of the ruling Communist Party. The president's ideas are to be known as Xi Jinping thought. He would be the first Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping to lend his name to a political theory. The Kenyan opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has met the head of the country's electoral body, a day after the official said he could not deliver a credible election in the current circumstances. After the talks, Mr. Odinga said he would consider taking part in the ballot if his concerns were addressed. Iran's Corps of Revolutionary Guards says it will accelerate its ballistic missile production program in response to what it called President Trump's hostile approach. The Japanese car maker Nissan is suspending production in Japan because unauthorized workers have continued to carry out vehicle checks. It's the latest scandal to hit Japanese companies, which once had an envied global reputation for quality. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the Siberian lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. They say more must be done to stop polluted water flowing into the lake, killing its unique flora and fauna. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, the actress Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Starting at the age of 14, Danielle Darrieux played opposite some of the biggest names of the day. BBC News.
Coming up next, could a South Africa corruption scandal threaten leading UK banks? But first, allegations of corruption in Pakistan. An anti-corruption court there has brought charges against the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, his daughter and her husband over allegations linked to ownership of properties in London. The information came to light in the Panama paper leaks in 2016, which accused Mr Sharif's family members of owning properties in London through offshore companies. All three have pleaded not guilty. Mr Sharif resigned as Prime Minister in July after the Supreme Court disqualified him from office over undeclared income. NewsHour's Owen Bennett-Jones has been telling me more.
It's been brewing for a while, but it's a significant moment in the process. So whether it's the judiciary or the military, the fact is that the ousted Prime Minister is under increasing pressure. And he is in London. His daughter and son-in-law are in Pakistan. But between them, the three are under pressure from the courts now. It's all building up to the next elections next year, and the question of whether the system, if we can put it like that, judicial, military, opposition, whatever, if the system can keep Nawaz Sharif out of power.
And when you talk about it being part of a process, are we looking at a long process, or is the election going to concentrate and focus minds in terms of the actual court case?
Well, what I mean is it's taken a long time to get to this point. You know, Supreme Court hearings, various inquiries, National Accountability Bureau, the Prime Minister being forced out of office. And so it's taken a long time to get to the point where there are these formal charges. But what we're looking at now is during the next election campaign, will Nawaz Sharif, who's still head of his party, confront the military, confront the system and say, I am standing against the system. Please back me. Or will he be unable to carry his party and carry his support base in such a confrontation?
And what's your best assessment of whether he'll be able to do that, given how well established he is as an establishment candidate?
He's a big man. I mean, he's a big man of Pakistani politics. He has a huge base. His problem is that it's a centre-right base that doesn't tend to oppose the system. And he's asking his people to do something they're not very comfortable doing. I mean, if it was the Bhuttos with the Pakistan People's Party, they live on street politics, on opposition, on martyring themselves, on taking periods in prison as they challenge the system. But this is not how the Pakistan Muslim League traditionally has worked. And will he be able to take his support base into a confrontation with the military? A lot of people think he'll find that pretty difficult.
So, Owen, what about the elections then?
It's a fascinating situation. The former Test cricketer, Imran Khan, clearly thinks this is his moment. The Pakistan People's Party, the Bhutto's party, is very much on the back foot just now. We've got this huge challenge to the Pakistan Muslim League. And there is Imran Khan. His lifelong ambition to become the Prime Minister of Pakistan suddenly seems to be opening up. There are many people who think that Nawaz Sharif will hold on to enough support to frustrate Imran Khan's ambitions. But you have to wonder how free and fair the election will be, and whether Imran Khan, increasingly perceived as the establishment candidate, will find a way to get that job he so very much wants.
And that was my colleague, Owen Bennett-Jones. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC. I'm Razia Iqbal. There is a key summit of European leaders today to decide whether sufficient progress has been made on Brexit negotiations to move on to trade talks. These three significant sticking points have been the UK's financial obligations in leaving, the so-called divorce bill, the future of Northern Ireland, which will remain part of the UK but have a shared border with a country still in the EU, the Republic of Ireland, and the future of EU citizens living here and British citizens living in EU countries. On that last issue of EU nationals, the British Prime Minister Theresa May has made fresh promises to them that it will be as easy as possible to stay in the UK after Brexit. Mrs May made the remarks in an open letter which we have voiced up.
When we started this process, some accused us of treating EU nationals as bargaining chips. Nothing could have been further from the truth. EU citizens who've made their lives in the UK have made a huge contribution to our country, and we want them and their families to stay. I couldn't be clearer. EU citizens living lawfully in the UK today will be able to stay.
The Prime Minister said negotiations were proceeding well on this issue.
We're in touching distance of agreement. I know both sides will consider each other's proposals for finalising the agreement with an open mind. And with flexibility and creativity on both sides, I'm confident that we can conclude discussions on citizens' rights in the coming weeks.
And the letter stated that EU nationals would have a streamlined pathway to remaining in Britain.
We're developing a streamlined digital process for those applying for settled status in the UK in the future. This process will be designed with users in mind, and we will engage with them every step of the way. We will keep the cost as low as possible, no more than the cost of a UK passport. And importantly, for any EU citizen who holds permanent residence under the old scheme, there will be a simple process put in place to swap their current status for UK settled status.
The words of Prime Minister Theresa May in her letter to EU nationals. I'm joined on the line now by Professor Tanya Bultmann, who is a historian of migration at Northumbria University and an EU citizen living in the UK. She received her letter from the Prime Minister by email today. Let's start, Tanya Bultmann, by looking at that first point that we heard voiced there, the bargaining chip, her categorically denying that EU nationals were being used in the negotiations. What's your view of that?
Yeah, thanks for starting with that, and thanks for having me in the first place. Now, this bit is actually for want of a better term, my favourite bit of this letter, which actually I got as an email, because it's a lie. Let's be very clear, it's a flat-out lie. And I can prove this, of course, because there's ample of evidence of this from the government. We've had Liam Fox, who said that we are, EU nationals, I quote, main cards in Brexit negotiations. There was also a letter from the Home Office that says that the UK would lose, I quote, negotiating capital if our rights were agreed at the time. Now, I think this is maybe about a year ago or so, roughly. So, how are we not bargaining chips if these things were said? There's no other way but to say that this is a lie to describe this statement in the letter.
And when you got the letter, what was going through your mind as you were reading it?
Well, actually, I didn't get the letter first. I heard about this because there was a press release about it. So the first thing I asked myself is, okay, so here is a letter that is allegedly, supposedly, for EU nationals to secure or make us feel better about the situation. But actually, the press release came first. So then there was an embargo on the whole story until 10:30 p.m. That's not how you go about if you want to send genuine letters to very, very concerned people, millions of them, as a matter of fact. So that's really what I thought first.
When you talk about the bargaining chip issue as being a lie, are you not reassured that she is now written to you and the millions of other people who will be affected by this to reassure you?
No, why would I be? We've heard these stories. The lines are very similar to ones we've heard before. To be fair, I will say there are a few new bits in this email that we haven't heard before. But generally speaking, all this language about people first, about our rights being so important, I've heard that since the end of June last year. And that's the very point. It's been over a year now, so why would I suddenly believe this? I have no reason. In fact, if you think back a few weeks, Theresa May herself said that she couldn't guarantee what would happen, for example, if there was no deal. That's her own words. I have no trust in any of this.
And in terms of the new elements of what she has introduced, we're talking about the bureaucracy involved in achieving settled status. That, she suggests, will be made much easier.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously something that's good to hear. That has been kind of said for a while already as well. I think the point about user groups is new. Again, that's welcome. What I would still ask, though, is why are we talking about that now? We could have talked about that last year. And actually, there is a much more basic point, because frankly, I think people shouldn't be part of this at all. We are only talking about this because we were made part of the negotiations, and this applies to British in Europe as well. We are the same at the end of the day. I think there should have been a statement right after the Brexit vote to say people are not up for negotiation.
That point you've made very clear. I wonder what you think about the time frame, because she also mentions in the letter that from their perspective they are within touching distance of a solution. What's your view on that, given how much of a sticking point this has been?
I think, it's difficult to judge because obviously I'm not at the table where these negotiations take place. But looking at all the evidence that there is, the EU position has been very clear from a long time. The British position is much more muddled, changes quite regularly. I can't see this being in touching distance. It's closer perhaps than it used to be because some agreements were genuinely reached. So that might be the case, but in touching distance, there are still many, many sticking points.
Professor Tanya Bultmann, historian of migration at Northumbria University and an EU citizen living here in the UK. Thanks very much. Now, the UK Chancellor has asked financial regulators and the Serious Fraud Office to review whether banks, HSBC and Standard Chartered are linked to a corruption scandal in South Africa. The former Cabinet Minister and anti-apartheid activist Lord Hayne has raised concerns that the banks may inadvertently have been conduits for laundered money. And in an address to the House of Lords, Britain's second parliamentary chamber this morning, he outlined some of the details he'd provided to the Chancellor.
In my letter of the 25th of September to the Chancellor, I supplied for investigation 27 names and personal identification numbers, including President Jacob Zuma, 11 members of his family, 11 members of his close friends, the Gupta family, and their 5 associates, together with 14 entities linked to the Guptas and suspected to have been set up for the purposes of transnationally laundering an estimated £400 million or 7 billion rand of their illicit proceeds.
Shortly before we came on air, I asked Peter Hayne for further details of the basis of his claims.
I was briefed by whistleblowers within South Africa, very well placed in when they stopped my dad working. I was involved in leading the anti-apartheid movement in Britain. I've worked with Nelson Mandela. I knew him personally, as did my parents. All the values for which he and his comrades who sacrificed so much on Robben Island, all those values of the freedom struggle are frankly being trashed by the leadership of the country at the moment, and there has to be change. There are lots of people in South Africa who want that change and want all of this exposed.
When you talk about the legacy of Nelson Mandela and the fight against apartheid being trashed, the concerns that you're raising are now a new twist, a kind of latest development in what has been a massive corruption scandal that's shaking South Africa.
Yes, that corruption scandal has been running around for now a good year or two. And people are doggedly, brave journalists and others are doggedly trying to get to the truth. And so a lot of South Africans, many of whom are veterans of the anti-apartheid struggle, like myself, are deeply, deeply angry about all of this. And what now needs to happen is that the attention needs to shift from the domestic level in South Africa, where it's been focused, onto the international level, and governments right around the world, including the European Commission and also the British government, need to act against this. We've seen how companies like Bell Pottinger, which went bankrupt, KPMG, the auditing firm, global auditing firm, McKinsey, the global company, they've all been caught up in this by accepting fees from these corrupt sources, and they've all been contaminated and have had to apologize, and in the Bell Pottinger case went bankrupt. If you mix with these people, you do business with these people, you will suffer yourself. That's the message.
But isn't it also, doesn't it tell us something about, or at least force us to reflect on the values of these companies, these international brands, if you like, that are willing to engage with these politicians?
It does indeed. I think this is really a big question for the international financial institutions. Are you part of this corruption, or are you going to track it down ruthlessly and make sure those responsible and who are benefiting from the corruption are identified, are prosecuted, and the money is returned to South African taxpayers? That's terribly important. Any of those billions residing in accounts around the world has got to be revealed by the banks who hold them and given back to the South African Treasury, and the evidence supplied to South African Treasury officials to enable them to be dealt with and brought to justice.
That was Peter Hain, Lord Hain. We should add at this stage they are only allegations of corruption against President Zuma and the Guptas, and they strongly deny wrongdoing. Standard Chartered told the BBC that while they're not able to comment on the details of client transactions, they can confirm that following an internal investigation, certain accounts were closed in 2014, and HSBC declined to comment. Now look at what's coming up on the BBC World Service.
Well, after NewsHour today, the inquiry asks, is the Pope a Catholic?
And it's saying that he is allowing heretical views to spread in the church by basically being too ambiguous on this question of whether or not divorced remarried Catholics can receive communion.
And that's followed by World Business Report. On Friday at 12:30 GMT, we join Emma Barnett for Heart and Soul.
When I ask whether women leading prayers and reading from the Torah can spark a feminist revolution within Orthodox Judaism.
And Health Check talks about India's ban on fireworks during Diwali.
Now we're worried about respiratory illnesses and asthma and eyes that are burning and lungs that hurt and the smog that lingers for 3 days like a physical thing.
You can hear more at bbcworldservice.com/healthcheck.
Reminder of our top story this hour. The Spanish government is to begin the process of imposing direct rule on Catalonia after the regional government ignored a deadline to halt its bid for independence. Earlier on NewsHour, Sergio Correa and Francis Bonnet from Barcelona gave their reaction to this news.
I believe it is the moment for considering a full constitutional revision.
And not at all. I think that Catalonia must declare its independence. A lot of us wish our independence because it's our nation, as every.
Other headlines this hour. Chinese state media say the political thought of President Xi Jinping is to be enshrined in the official ideology of the ruling Communist Party. And one of the great of French cinema, the actress Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100. This is Razia Iqbal with NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Scientists in Germany have documented a steep decline in the population of flying insects in less than 30 years. The study, carried out in 63 German nature reserves, showed a loss of more than 3/4 of the total biomass of flying insects, including butterflies, bees and moths. The study did not give a reason for the sharp drop, but many of the nature reserves were surrounded by farmers' fields, suggesting that the use of pesticides could be to blame. Lynn Dix is a research fellow at the University of East Anglia here in the UK, specialising in the conservation of wild insects. What does she make of the study?
I'm not particularly surprised, but I think it's quite a startling scale of decline that's documented here. What this new study provides is some important new evidence for a decline in the amount or the biomass of insects. It's something that many entomologists have suspected is occurring for some time.
Tell us then what it is that's causing the decline. What's killing the insects?
The honest answer is we don't know exactly. There are a number of different things, probably a combination of different stressors. There have been some very large changes in landscape over the last 50, 60 years. So during the time when agriculture has intensified, we've lost a lot of habitats, particularly things like flower-rich grassland. In the UK we lost 97% of our flower-rich grasslands during the last century. And these kind of changes are also happening across Europe and in many other parts of the world. We are using insecticides. Insecticides are designed to kill insects and they are sprayed on fields every year, so we shouldn't be that surprised if we see some decline in the numbers of insects. Climate change is a long-term issue that could be a real threat to some species, but I don't think that explains these declines. I would suggest it's a combination of habitat loss, intensive agriculture and insecticide and herbicide use. And I feel like a 76% drop in the biomass is a lot of insect matter to lose.
And the loss of that creates what impact?
Well, there are a number of serious impacts that it could create. The most important things to say are that a lot of animals eat insects. Birds, for instance, many bird species have insects as their main food in the summer, and they feed insects to their chicks. The other thing that's important about insects is that they do things for us which are generally unseen. Pollination is one of the things. So some insects move pollen between flowers, and that creates seeds and fruits, which is then important for the birds that eat seeds and fruits, for instance, and important for some of our crops.
Why is this even an issue if we haven't already seen a huge impact of this level of decline?
It's quite hard to say. I mean, the farmland bird indicator shows that there might be some impacts on farmland birds, but some of the other groups that feed on insects, bats for instance, have actually been increasing. The latest indicator shows an increase in bats across Europe. And that's because other conservation efforts have been really focused on those species. I think what we need to think about is 50 or 100 years ago, before humans were having such a massive impact on the planet, everywhere was just teeming with life. There was just much more of everything than there is now. There's this kind of shifting baseline thinking which says, well, we look out into the countryside now, we see lots of wildlife, so we think it's fine. But what we don't realise is that 100 years ago, there was a lot more. You can't carry on decreasing the biomass of insects by 6% a year without, at some point, the whole system really starting to collapse and, species dropping out all over the place, and we wouldn't be able to recover it very easily from that. So there's a concept of a tipping point.
What needs to change in terms of the way in which we conduct our engagement with the natural world to stop this decline?
The main things we need to do are ensure that we're not overusing insecticides. We're only using insecticides and herbicides that remove flowering weeds when it's absolutely necessary, and not any unnecessary use. And protecting habitats where there is natural habitat. It's really important to keep it, make sure, look after it, and maybe put buffers around it so that you're protecting as much of that as you can.
That was Lynn Dix, a research fellow at the University of East Anglia here in the UK. Now, the ruling Socialist Party in Venezuela won a commanding victory in the country's regional election on Sunday, but the country's opposition and the US State Department aren't recognising the result. The win strengthens the grip that President Nicolás Maduro has in Venezuela. In part, the result may have come from high rates of abstention and exhaustion with politics after a gruelling year of protests and street clashes. The violence on the streets has ended for now, but many problems are as bad as ever, from inflation to food shortages. And as Will Grant reports from Caracas, they are influencing every sphere of daily life, even sport.
The recent turbulence in Venezuela has been well documented. Violent street protests and demonstrations, tear gas and riot police. However, for now, a semblance of normal life has returned to Caracas. And in Venezuela, normal life includes baseball. It is the country's national sport. As the Leones of Caracas took on the Bravos of Margarita, the stadium rose as one for the national anthem, a rare moment of unity in an otherwise disjointed and polarised country. But even here, amid their favourite pastime, Venezuelans' problems are never far away. The commentary team at Unión Radio is for most Venezuelans the voice of baseball.
People use baseball to get away from the problems,
One of the reporters, Diego Castillo, put down his microphone for a moment to tell me how the country's political and economic turmoil was affecting the game.
This year, you can see the audience is not the same because the inflation, and today the game is in the afternoon. But in the night, the people are scared to go to the stadiums because coming back to their houses at night, it's very dangerous.
It's not just the fans. The league itself is in trouble. With the Venezuelan economy in freefall, teams receive fewer gate receipts from the turnstiles each week. Even the state-run energy company PDVSA has become a sponsor as the government attempts to keep the league afloat. Luis Avila, the chairman of Leones de Caracas, says they are making cuts everywhere they can.
Hospitality, meals, logistics, transportation, hotels, use of the stadium, that is not our stadium, our expenses are growing in a rate of probably 500 or 700%,
How are you coping?
I'm sorry, but, being very conscious about spending, taking a lot of tough decisions, trying to help the people until the limit we can, but it's not an easy situation.
61.4%. Récord de participación.
Of course, ask most CEOs of a big Venezuelan business how to get out of the crisis, and the chances are they will say the government of Nicolás Maduro must go. However, at least for the time being, there's no chance of that. The regional election victory has strengthened President Maduro's hand, even if the opposition are crying foul.
That was Will Grant reporting from Caracas. That's it for this edition of the programme. It's been lovely having your company this past hour. Tell us what you think about what you hear. At BBC NewsHour is the programme's Twitter handle. At Razia Iqbal is mine if you want to speak to me directly. Till the next time, bye-bye.
This is the BBC World Service. Now, close your eyes and listen.
In the distance, I saw the little guest house. It hadn't completely vanished yet.
If you have a story to tell, why not bring it to life in a radio play? Our international playwriting competition is free to enter and open to anyone living outside the UK.
For details of how to enter and the full terms and conditions, go to bbcworldservice.com/radioplay. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
Our diplomatic correspondent James Landell was at the court to hear.
As our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale reports from Mosul.
Our Africa editor Mary Harper reports.
Let's go to Hong Kong now. Time for business news. On our business desk is Andrew Wood.
Available on the BBC iPlayer radio app. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to the inquiry on the BBC World Service. I'm Ruth Alexander. Pope Francis is being accused of encouraging un-Catholic views.
It's accusing him of spreading heresy.
The controversy focuses on whether people who have divorced and remarried should be able to receive communion, a ritual that is central to the Catholic faith.
Being in that state of sin means that one cannot receive communion, even if it's blunt and harsh to say it as clearly as that.
People enter and exit relationships somewhat flippantly. The Church stood as this prophetic voice to not do that.
Many say Pope Francis is a modernizer.
In order to bring people to Jesus Christ, you have to get involved in the messiness of people's lives.
But others say his job is to uphold the faith, not to change it. So we're asking, is the Pope Catholic? That's the inquiry after the news.
Hello, I'm Marion Marshall with the BBC News. The Spanish government says it will start the process of stripping Catalonia's autonomous powers on Saturday, after the head of the regional government ignored its ultimatum to rescind his bid for independence. Tom Burridge reports from Barcelona.
Spanish officials say their government has to act, to uphold the country's law and constitution, and to rein in an unruly, disobedient regional government. The powers Madrid plans to invoke have never been used before. The Spanish constitution does not specify how they will work in practice. Essentially, the Spanish government can decide when and how it acts. But this is a sensitive moment, so when it comes to actually taking concrete measures to reduce the powers of Catalonia's devolved administration, Madrid will tread carefully and probably slowly.
Chinese state media say the country's leader, Xi Jinping, has been given his own political theory, which would entrench his position at the top of the ruling Communist Party. Xinhua news agency quotes other senior leaders as saying his ideas would be known as Xi Jinping thought. He would be the first Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping to lend his name to a political theory, suggesting that Mr. Xi's authority extends further than China's previous two presidents. Xinhua says Xi Jinping thought has 14 fundamental principles. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. Charles Haviland has more details.
Surrounded by Siberian mountains, Lake Baikal holds 1/5 of the world's fresh water and thousands of unique species. But Russian biologists and officials are alarmed at the rise in threats to its ecology. Because of polluted wastewater, there's been a steep fall in the numbers of the omelfish, which is only found in the lake and is an important part of the local diet. There is now a ban on commercial fishing of the omel. Other species, including invertebrates, are being killed by rotting algae. President Putin says the protection of Lake Baikal is a priority, but scientists say sewage plants need to be rebuilt and anti-pollution laws enforced.
One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, Daniel Derrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
Long before Brigitte Bardot earned herself the nickname BB, there was DD, Daniel Derrieux. It was way back in 1931, in the early years of sound films, that the French were first charmed by her performance as the teenage daughter of arriviste parents in the comedy Le Bal. Though she was lured briefly to Hollywood, the vast majority of Daniel Derrieux's more than 100 films were French. Most famously, perhaps, she starred in 1952 as the beautiful aristocrat whose diamond earrings are the centre of the plot in